Hello, my name is Zachary.goldberg. I'm senior researcher at Trilateral Research, and the title of my paper today is Ethical Responsibility in Space Exploration. The ethical questions arising in the context of current and future space travel and exploration are as abundant as they are complex. This is owing to both the increasing number of technological possibilities, opening opportunities for human exploration and exploitation of space, other planets, asteroids, in addition to the myriad of relevant scientific and ethical factors that remain unknown about these activities. Much of the literature focusing on an ethics of space exploration has attempted to apply and analyze the traditional Western ethical theories of Kantian deontology, consequentialism, and virtue theory to the context of space travel and exploration, and then discuss which of these theories would be the most appropriate ethical guide for human activities in space. In this paper, I argue that these discussions are invaluable not because they provide a concrete ethical guide to follow, but because they do not. Understanding ethical theories is only the first step in cultivating an ethic of personal responsibility that focuses on A, questioning the nature of ethical values, and B, questioning one's abilities to act ethically, especially in the context of significant unknowns. I'd conclude that cultivating personal responsibility as it is here described is critical for stakeholders involved in current and future human activities in space. As more money is invested in space, as more people, both professional astronauts as well as tourists, travel to space, as our spaceships are able to venture farther out into the galaxy, as we contemplate mining extraterrestrial resources for use on Earth, or consider terraforming and colonizing Mars or other celestial bodies, we are confronted with a myriad of ethical questions, both theoretical and practical. For example, does the space environment contain anything of inherent value? Do we have an ethical obligation to limit our activities on celestial objects such as asteroids, comets, moons, or planets? Or are they there for us to research and exploit? Are we ethically permitted to take resources from the moon or other planets for use on Earth? Should we preserve pristine space environments? If we discover extraterrestrial life, including microbial, would it deserve our moral consideration? For what reasons? To what extent? If long-duration spaceflight becomes technologically feasible, would it be justifiable to send humans into space for years or decades? What are the risks involved? If we discover that another planet, for example Mars, would be habitable if we drastically altered the landscape, also known as terraforming, are we justified in doing so? What challenges would space colonies face both in terms of physical survival but also in terms of psychological hardships? Is the current budget allocated for space exploration justifiable when there are injustices on Earth that need urgent attention? How can we clean up the vast amount of space junk in orbit? How can we avoid future missions adding to this pollution? How can we further exploit satellites for Earth observation to combat climate change or to provide digital education to the world's population? Does space belong to no one or to everyone? What are the legal ramifications of this answer regarding property and ownership? Is outer space a land grab where prospectors can claim planetary resources on a first-come, first-served basis? Which regulatory protocols do we need in place? How can we foster continued international collaboration in space? Is exploration a good in its own right, or is it only justifiable if it yields actionable research? Are we justified in asking astronauts to engage in such high-risk activity which literally changes their bodies in terms of fluid distribution, loss of body mass, and sleeplessness? The ethical, scientific, legal, and societal significance of these questions remains indisputable. Unsurprisingly, scholars in the domains of space ethics particularly, as well as the ethics of technology more generally, have approached these questions and others about the impact of new technologies by appealing to influential ethical theories. This approach is not surprising because consequentialism and utilitarianism, Kantian deontology, and virtue ethics are the most influential ethical theories in the Western tradition precisely because they are insightful, have continually resolved various ethical quandaries, can each appeal to common intuitions about ethical action and decision-making, identify values important to human interaction with other humans, with animals, with the environment, and have been tried and tested by philosophers for centuries. To these principal theories, we can also add more recent developments in philosophical and applied ethics that also provide insight to the issues and questions concerning space travel and exploration, namely the ethics of care, principlism, multiple theories of justice, and differing approaches to issues in environmental ethics. Despite the ethical insights that these theories contribute to our thinking about human activities in space, each theory faces critical objections and counterexamples. Consequentialism obligates us under some circumstances to sacrifice the few for the many. Kantian deontology rejects the possibility of trading off slight transgressions of a person's autonomy or dignity for significantly good consequences that could benefit humanity. And virtue ethics has been criticized as not being sufficiently action-guiding. Furthermore, each of these ethical theories is based in knowledge of human nature, of what has intrinsic value, of the nature of the right or the good, or the identification of those character traits that result in good and right actions. However, many of the foreseeable human activities in space are so radically different from their terrestrial counterparts that reliance on ethical knowledge to adjudicate ethical dilemmas and serve as a trusted guide in the context of space is worrisome, at least. Despite this worry, the criticisms directed toward these ethical theories ought not be seen in a negative light. Rather, understanding each of their positive aspects, followed by reflection upon their individual inadequacies in the context of human activities in space, will prove essential to the cultivation of an ethic of responsibility for space exploration. Continued reflection will reveal that these ethical theories are not incorrect, but each is insufficient on its own to provide a comprehensive approach to the ethics of space. The subsequent awareness of the reasons for this insufficiency is paradoxically a significant ethical step. It is one that leads not to ethical expertise, but to ethical responsibility instantiated through the activity of inquiry. Given the significant unknowns of future human activities in space, for example, will we encounter other life and in what form? Will we go on long-duration space flights? And what biological and psychological effects do such flights have? Will we colonize other planets? Will humans be born on other planets? How will tourism in space develop? It is not moral expertise that will prove necessary, but a commitment to asking ethical questions. There are two lessons from the history of philosophy that inspire this current position. I won't go into the details in this short presentation, but they include Socrates in both the Euthyphro and the Apology, and Kierkegaard in the retelling of the story of Abraham and Isaac in Fear and Trembling. And these examples exemplify questioning and challenging ethical theories and ethical norms in order to cultivate an ethic of personal responsibility. And we'll come back to this in the discussion section. These lessons from the history of philosophy support the claim that questioning ethical values is essential to developing individual and personal responsibility. The examples illustrate that adopting and obediently following an ethical rule, even those rules that are ethically justifiable, such as those that constitute consequentialism or Kantian deontology, will not elicit in the individual an ability to cultivate a personalized ethic of responsibility, that is, an understanding and acceptance of oneself as a moral agent, in addition to ethical ownership of one's decisions and actions. Both Socrates and Kierkegaard's Abraham help illustrate that the moral landscape is filled with perplexing issues, making it difficult to navigate. Rather than approaching these difficulties with a ready-made principle, purporting to resolve questions before we have even identified them, we ought to embrace ours and others' ignorance, cultivate our ability to question the roots of this ignorance, and attempt to identify what a particular value means generally, means to society, and means to us as moral agents. Since questioning is so important to the ethic of responsibility, it's appropriate to question the ethic of responsibility framework that I'm proposing in this presentation. The questions that I've selected are on the slide. First of all, aren't there already existing contemporary versions of this approach? There are developed philosophical treatments concerning an ethic of responsibility. They appeared originally in the literature in the feminist philosophical literature, but have been taken up by non-feminist philosophers since their appearance. And these influential theories have helped to develop philosophical thinking concerning the source and content of moral responsibility and have been influential for my work as well. But the current approach is not limited to human-human interaction, which most of these previous or foregoing theories are. And second, as I indicated briefly, the epistemic responsibility that is illustrated through questioning is also a kind of ethical responsibility. Secondly, isn't the ethic of responsibility derivative of other ethical theories, especially virtue theory? The short answer is yes, it's certainly derivative in the sense that what's required in the ethic of responsibility is to first understand traditional and standard ethical theories very well, to be able to ask serious and informed questions about those theories. So in that sense, it is derivative. There is a significant difference, however, from virtue theory. For traditional virtue theorists, virtue is synonymous with moral expertise. And expertise is constituted by knowledge and understanding. But the ethic of responsibility is, although heavily influenced by virtue theory, it contains a critical difference. At the core of the ethic of responsibility, as I presented it here, is the recognition that we cannot be certain what the correct moral principle for a given case is, and yet we must decide and act anyway. The ethic of responsibility presupposes knowledge and understanding of the limits of one's knowledge and understanding. And it's precisely the awareness of these limits and the need to continue questioning that makes the ethic of responsibility essential for circumstances of significant unknowns, such as the context of human activities in space. Next, does adopting an ethic of responsibility approach guarantee ethically good decision-making and action? The answer to this question is fairly short and straightforward. Unfortunately not. Of course, questioning and challenging ethical norms and ethical theories can lead to ethical nihilism, can lead to ethical relativism, or could lead to embracing the violation or transgression of ethical values. Finally, why is this approach appropriate for the context of human activities in space? I've indicated throughout this presentation that the ethic of responsibility ought to be utilized in contexts with significant unknowns, and it's particularly applicable to human activities in space where we are dealing with significant unknowns to an even greater extent than on Earth. So here's an example. One regarding space activities. One might view through a consequentialist lens the questions whether it would be ethically justified to mine Mars for minerals to be used as resources on Earth, or whether it would be ethically justified to look for signs of previous life, such as fossilized microbes. On the one hand, the activity of mining will disturb the Martian environment never before touched by any human. Perhaps there is some value in such pristine environments. On the other hand, humans are in need of new and renewable resources to support their lives and activities on Earth. Furthermore, the discovery of extraterrestrial life, even in microbial form, would be an immensely significant scientific discovery and could provide critical understanding about Mars, and, since Earth and Mars had relevantly similar environments until about 10 billion years ago, provide invaluable information about how life on Earth emerged and evolved. The ethic of responsibility does not prompt questions about how to adjudicate these conflicting consequences and their values, or to help us imagine unforeseen consequences. These considerations are essential, but still belong within the standard consequentialist framework. The ethic of responsibility goes beyond this level of reflection and elicits questions about the value of thinking about consequences at all. It also shifts the focus from the non-personal value belonging to states of affairs to contemplating the personal manner in which value or disvalue is created through an individual person's, including my own, decisions and actions. It prompts us to ask about the impossibility of making an ethically good decision given our ignorance under particular circumstances, and yet we must nevertheless make some decision and take action. One cannot simply take refuge in an abstract ethical principle. One must ask, how do I take responsibility for my decisions and actions? How do I make amends if I inadvertently violate the ethical values I want to protect and promote? What if I cannot repair the violations? The purpose of raising these questions is not to resolve them necessarily, as would be the purpose under other ethical frameworks. Rather, the activity of raising questions while acknowledging that they cannot be satisfactorily answered is the core of an ethic of responsibility. Given the vast unknowns surrounding and arising from human activities in space, the continuous activity of raising ethical questions is paramount. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to discussion and questions.